Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversations. And I'm honestly so excited for today's episode because I get to bring you into a bit of my past and I get to introduce you to someone I got to go to high school with who is now doing amazing, fantastic things in the world of education for young folks who happen to be in her space. Her name is Doreen Bonsu. And Doreen, thank you for coming on for Courageous Conversations.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm so pumped to have you here. So, this is going to be a conversation and we're going to go back and forth. I have some questions and I'm going to let go of some of the reins and let you ask me some questions.
Thank you, because I have a lot to ask myself.
No worries. So, I guess the first question in introducing you to our audience and getting them to know a little bit about you, you're in the space of education, but the work you do is impactful because you draw a lot on equity within the work you do in education. So, why was this a mission for you?
Thank you. And I just want to honestly take some time to thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your podcast. It's very humbling. When I'm at work doing the work, when you're in it, you're just like, you know what? I'm just trying to do the best. But for you to reach out and have some time for me to share my story, I just want to show my gratitude. But to answer your question, how I kind of align myself with equity work, with everything and anything, I begin to position myself, right? So I'm a black woman of Ghanaian descent. I'm a child of immigrant parents. And when it comes to my teaching philosophy that I've I sort of came to, it comes to the word Sankofa. And
Okay.
Sankofa is a tree word, and tree is the language we speak in Ghana. And Sankofa means in order to progress forward, you need to go back, right? So in order to go into the future, you need to also turn and reflect. So for me, I think about where I came from, where my parents have come from, how far we've come in that sense. And I see myself in education spaces. I see that there are students that look like me. And I know that the system that I work in is not neutral, right? So when we're looking at why I do equity work. The reason why is because I believe representation is important. I know that the system hasn't done justice when it comes to folks that look like myself or racialized folks as well. So I really just try to create equitable opportunities for all students so that they're able to be successful.
So, you talked a little bit about how you center yourself and how that affects and impacts how you protect your teaching, your curriculum, your teaching style. So, when you think about centering yourself, does your experience is as when you were a student impact how you make sure that the curriculum, the courses that you offer are culturally responsive and also done in a way that the students feel like if they're having struggles, they can ask for support without feeling judged, or if they're excelling, they feel celebrated when they excel?
Yes, for sure. Thanks for that question. So for me, like one of the reasons why I went into education is because I honestly had great high school teachers. They like poured into me, like they provided a lot of great opportunities. They were great role models. But one thing I kind of realized was there was a lack of representation, right? And there was a lack of opportunity to learn about folks that look like me. So, one thing that I'm really grateful for and I've been really intentional about is infusing narratives that reflect the Black Canadian experience. So, for example, right now, I actually created a course and I brought it to my school board, and it talks about the Black Canadian experience. So, it's a grade 11 history course. And it's a blessing because every day I go to work and I get to teach kids about people that look like me. And a lot of people have the assumption that a lot of my students are Black. I live in a region that is heavily diverse. But the students in front of me are actually not many of them are Black. Some of them are, but some are South Asian, some are Filipino, some are white. So it's a diverse class, and all of them are interested in learning about Black Canadian narratives. And it's important to note that in the curriculum itself, which you've spoken to, it's not a requirement in Ontario for students from kindergarten to grade 12. They are not required to learn about the experiences of Black Canadians. And that's an example of how we see how anti Black racism is evident in the education system, right? I did some research, and I know you're from Newfoundland, or you're speaking from Newfoundland. And I read that enslavement happened in Newfoundland, right? And folks don't know that enslavement happened here in Canada. People don't know that when we're looking at the Black experience here in Canada, we've been here for over 400 years, but no one knows that, right? And then we're talking about how why anti-black racism is a thing and how it manifests over time. So when I am teaching my practice, my pedagogy, I'm very intentional about centering the Black experience and also making sure it's not a deficit experience, right? So I'm not teaching just about slavery. We're talking about Africa, pre-colonial Africa, right? So today we were talking about like Great Zimbabwe, Mali, Mansa Musa, the Kingdom of Congo. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure that our students, when they're learning about people of African descent, when they're learning about Black Canadians in general, it's from a fulfilling perspective, right? Not something that's deficit.
I really like what you're talking about in terms of like representation and the way representation shows up. Because typically when
Mhm.
people talk about representation, especially in like classrooms, they talk about like the numbers of diverse communities that show up in that space. But representation is more than just numbers. It's like
Mhm.
stories being told. And so when you were putting together your curriculum and how you were talking about Africa in pre-colonial times, why was it essential for you to have representation that didn't just conform to the idea of what people think blackness is in Canada, and why it was
Right.
important to draw on the greatness that exists in the black identity beyond surviving enslavement?
Thank you. You know, that's a really good question. And it's funny because kids are so honest, right? And a lot of them come into the classroom and I'm like, share with me what you know about the continent of Africa. And they're not like kindergarten, right? They're in grade 11. So they're around 16 turning 17. So they're about to go to grade 12, go to university. And they were honest. They were like, you know what? There will be like, oh, Africa, it's isolated, maybe it's primitive, or even like they don't really know much, or is it a country miss? And you can't even be mad at them, right? Because they don't know. And when we're looking at folks in Canada, and one of my colleagues said this to me, we are so many generations behind, even when we're talking about indigenous folks, right? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of how much we know about indigeneity and colonization and how it's impacted us as a nation. But then think about how much more behind we are when we're learning about the Black experience or people of African descent, right? So again, I think it's really important just to debunk myths. So some of the activities we do, we debunk myths about the continent of Africa, right? So they do research, they learn. Africa is not a country. Africa is not full of corrupt politicians, right? Africa is innovative. Africa is not just all desert and jungle, right? So it's pretty cool to see. Like some of them, they know this stuff because the internet is there, but they don't know much. You know what I mean? So by the end of the semester, they know a lot more about the continent and the people that live within it.
I think that's really beautiful in like the fact of your like debunking myths, because the myths are some of the biggest ways that racism seems to show up in classroom spaces.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, for you, as someone who is Black, went through the education system, the Canadian education system, we know that there's diversity between the provinces of how education runs. But what are some of the instances that you struggled with as a youth, maybe going through where racism showed up, that you're seeing repeat itself, that you're consciously working to deconstruct within your classroom spaces?
Thank you. Yeah, good question. So for me as a student, I'll be honest, right? Like I grew up in North York and then I moved to Oakville when I was pretty young. So I'd say I've been around predominantly white spaces for a long time. But I think when I was in school, I wouldn't be able to name the racism that I saw or experienced, but I think we all know that feeling. You know what
Hmm.
I mean? In terms of now how I see it in my positionality as an educator, I'd say the big things are lack of representation in educators, right? Or even administration. School leaders do a good job or really build a culture of a school, right? So imagine having a Black administrator in that regard, one that is equity focused and the impact that they could have on their school community. So representation is a big thing too. Another thing too, which I've spoken to, is the curriculum, right? And the fact that we don't have any explicit accountability in terms of policies that ensures that K to 12 students are learning about the Black experience. Another thing I would say too is, but I'm seeing it better now, is the ability to come together like frameworks to support Black students. So right now, I know where I work, we do have Black graduation coaches. So it's a program where we have Black staff in the building to help support some Black learners. And then we also have BSU, so Black Student Unions. So I could be a Black staff or it could be a non-Black staff. And whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, they're able to come together and able to support Black students. So those are some cool things that are happening now. But I guess to answer your question, what I see back then and now, I would say, yeah, lack of representation, curriculum, and then we continue to see in general when we're looking at the over policing of our Black students, right, and discipline, right. We see that the data is there in regards to the disproportionate rates that Black students are suspended. I think that's something that needs to be addressed or continue to be addressed. As well as another thing too, I think is important is the way we look at Black parents, like Black families, like re-engaging Black families into the school system and also leaning into Black community support. So there's, I mean, like I said, it manifests itself in so many different ways. There's also streaming is another thing too, lack of opportunities in terms of like getting students to do, I don't know if it's workshops or outreach. So these are all different things that are still persist within the education system today, I'd say.
Like there's so many things that existed while we were in school that are still occurring now, but the one thing you pointed that like brought great joy to me as you were talking is the creation of like the Black graduation coaches, because I'm
Yeah.
sitting there thinking to know that if there's someone there, like yes, all your teachers we hope want to see their students excel and graduate and move on to the next,
Mm-hmm.
but to know that as a Black student there is someone specifically focused on your success, that's there,
Mm-hmm.
who catches early that you might not be
Mm-hmm.
getting to where you want to be or where you can be, and that is
Mm-hmm.
engaged enough with you to ensure that you get there, and provides you not just the academic support but that socio that economic not economic that social support and that like emotional way of being like checking in and being like, you good, is
Yes.
this what you still
Yeah.
want, is this how you want to get there? I think that
Yes, it's amazing. You know, I'm able to see the work. I know in the board that I work for, we have one. She's amazing. Shout out Akisha. She's phenomenal. Unfortunately, we just have one, right? And the whole board.
oh wow.
So that, yeah, right. So it's a lot, but that's why it's important. Like my thing right now is like really trying to get more Black students to become teachers, right? Because we are on the ground and we're the ones that are supporting students. And when we look at if we look at education as a whole, it is a role that is predominantly held by white women.
Hmm.
So it's also important to make sure that as an education system, we know how to go about things from a culturally responsive way so that not only our Black students, but all students can thrive, right? And we do that by centering their cultural experience, by leaning into student voice, and just making sure that there's different opportunities to see themselves reflected in the curriculum that they're learning.
So on that note, there are probably going to be teachers who are not Black who will be listening to this podcast and watching along, and let's say their
Mm-hmm.
interest is peaked now and they're like, okay, I know I'm not currently part of the problem, so to say, but I'm not part of the solution either. Who are like, how do I clue in so that I can make sure that I'm culturally responsive to some of the issues that my students might be facing in a way that makes them feel valued and supported and not in that white savior mentality? What would you, if you could say, here's your starting point, not the end, but this is where you can start, what would you tell them?
You know, I think kind of like what I did in the beginning, I think whenever you're coming to serve anyone, you need to do some critical self-reflection yourself, right? And just think about your positionality in that space. Like you really need to be intentional. Like whose voices do I want to center? Like if I know I want to be more culturally responsive, how could I show that I'm more inclusive? What are the pictures that I'm putting up in my classroom? In terms of the texts that I'm teaching my students, what are the different intersections that I'm introducing to my students? In terms of the authors that we're engaging with, what is their nationality? And then when we're being inclusive, think about like, am I comfortable talking about things like race? Am I comfortable talking about racism? Am I comfortable about calling out what systemic racism looks like? Am I even comfortable about talking about equity and what that is? Is that something I believe in? You know, I think representation is like the easiest thing we could do, right? We can find a book, find a flag, find a poster, and that really makes a difference. I've had students come into my class and be like, wow, this class feels welcoming, right? Because I have posters, right? It's like gender's not binary. All immigrants are welcome here. Black lives matter. Everyone should be a feminist. I have flags all over, right? I got my Wakanda poster, right? And that's just you coming in. That's just you coming into the class. I haven't said anything, but
Yeah.
it's still very telling, right? And then the next step to that, you would hope people would build from that and be able to speak to those posters. Or not even you, maybe you get your kids to do some research. Hey, what do you think it means when it says gender isn't binary? Or what do you think it means when it says Black Lives Matter? Or why is it important that immigrants matter here? Or, you know what I mean? So being able to speak to it. And then eventually from there, you're able to set a foundation of equity and inclusion in your classroom. And then hopefully your students are inspired to be social aid or agents of social change, and they'll be able to speak to it. And then you can kind of be a facilitator. So again, to answer your question, critical reflection is super important. You want to make sure you know what your why is. And then after that, I would just ask folks to be intentional and go through representation. Thinking about the texts, the different texts that you're engaging with in your classroom and making sure there is a variety of representation. And it doesn't only have to be about race, right? It could be about gender, it could be sexual orientation, it could be religion, it could be in terms of abilities. There's so many intersections that can be tapped into. So you just want to be intentional about that.
So I really love when you've been talking because you know your why. You figured out your why. So was there a key moment in your teaching career where you were like, this affirms my why, where a moment was like, yes, I'm in the spot doing the thing I need to do, and this is confirmation of why?
Yes, you know what? I've always loved history. It was back in 2015, I watched the CBC special Being Black in Canada. I'm not sure if you're familiar with
Yes.
it. So there's one in 2015, and there were two teachers in Windsor, and they have been like foundational in terms of where I'm at. And I saw how they created this African Canadian history course.
Hmm.
And in 2015, I was in teachers college, and I was like, I need to do that. Like when all the ducks come in a row, like I'm gonna make sure I do that. And like I had, I spoke passionately about the importance of centering Black narratives. Being able to create this course, honestly, has been like transformational for me because it made me also question my biases and also like, we're talking about decolonizing oneself and trying to understand like why we do the things we do. It really made me question my why, right? But then when you're saying my aha moment, it was, I want to say the first time I taught it, because the first time you do anything, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But honestly, I'd say this year, like I think it's the fifth time I've taught it, and I have a phenomenal class. And I'll share with you one moment. It actually happened last week. I almost cried. So we do presentations. We talk about trailblazers, right? So we
Mhm.
focus on Black Canadian trailblazers. And one student did a Beverly, I believe it's Beverly McCool. She was an entrepreneur, and she's a Black woman that did hair products. And this student, she's a white student. And I always ask the students, I want you to see yourself in this person, right? Just because they're Black doesn't mean that
Yeah.
you can't connect to them. So you need to make some personal connections. This girl said through her research, she realized that her hair products, because she has curly hair, are made for Black textured hair. And she uses Black products. And she's like, I didn't even know. And I was like, wow. And she's like, I didn't know. And then her discussion question was like, does anyone else use Black products? And I was just like,
Oh, Doreen.
I was like, do you guys, and I got so excited. I was like, do you guys see this? We have this student here who loves her curls. And she is acknowledging the fact that she's using products for Black people. So when we're talking about Black owned business or Black products, it's not just for Black people, it's for everybody. Do you see that? And I was like, when you were talking about this woman's business, how she was denied a bank loan, how people didn't believe that her product would succeed because it was just for Afro textured hair. Now you're standing here. You are talking about how this has served you. You know what is fascinating? Isn't that,
That's
isn't that
deep.
beautiful?
It is.
Right? And it's like I'm really intentional about like the learning I do with my students. Like I want them to see our humanity.
Yeah.
I really want, and I want them to come to it themselves. And it's not like they don't have, like, my students don't have like a lack of dignity for Black people. No,
Yeah.
but you have to understand the messaging, the narratives, the media that's around them that
Yeah.
talks about Black bodies, that talks about Black people.
Yeah.
It's not always positive.
No.
You know what I mean? So I always question and critique it, right? And then I also think it's important, again, I've been constantly saying like Black Canadian narratives. Because, yes, of course, we are heavily influenced by America. But one thing I don't like is, when people are talking about Black History Month, obviously Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King is foundational.
Yeah.
Rosa Parks, foundational. Muhammad Ali, foundational. Nelson Mandela, foundational. All amazing folks. We too have some foundational people here on this
Yeah.
land in Canada, right? But their stories have not yet been uncovered.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So again,
No.
just like reiterating, like that was like, I was like,
It
if that
touches you
like
somewhere.
if she can see the beauty and the production of Black folk, again, we're not just serving us, we're helping everybody.
Exactly.
Sometimes people don't get that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? When people say Black Lives Matter, it's intersectional.
It is.
Black trans lives, Black folks with disability, Black folks who have mental health issues. It's everyone,
It is.
you know?
No.
So
Oh.
I'd say it's that,
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. That absolutely is
right?
a moment of confirmation that you're in the space you need to be in.
Yes, yeah. So it's amazing, and I teach history, I teach social justice, so I'm in a really neat spot right now. I'm also able to do some work, like professional workshops, some professional development for teachers. Again, I've done presentations talking about how to teach Black Canadian history, how to implement Black joy, center Black joy in your classrooms, talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, the importance of that, being a culturally responsive educator. So I'm really like invested in just giving folks the tools and the confidence to be able to support all types of learners, right? Because sometimes folks feel uncomfortable with things they don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that after presentations or conversations, they feel more equipped. The language acuity is there, the tools are there, the strategies are there to kind of highlight these important topics in their classroom.
No, you're doing what you're meant to do, Doreen. Like, you are in the space that a lot of students are going to be very grateful that you exist in the industry that you exist in because of the ripple effects of the work that you do. When you were
Thank you.
talking earlier, you touched on the importance of bringing Black families and Black community into the space.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to
Yes.
pair that with the next question, but with a little bit about talking about Black joy.
Hmm.
Why is it important to bring the joy that we see in Black communities
Hmm.
into that educational sphere where school is not seen as this force that is challenging what a Black community is, and a Black
Hmm.
community is not seen as this weird outlier that doesn't support academic success and the
Hmm.
way it represents itself? So why
Hmm.
do you think the two need to have a way to meet in the middle?
So you're saying black joy and
School, and so the Black joy that's found in Black communities, because it's
yes,
there, and anyone who,
and the
yes,
institution of education. Why do they need to
exactly.
come together? Historically, when we're talking about education, and I'll talk about this from an Ontario framework,
Hmm.
it's important to note that there were segregated schools in Ontario, right? So white folk were very intentional in making sure that Black children were excluded from learning, right? And we know the power of education and how problematic that is. But it's also important to know that Black parents fought for their children and for their education. So many of them started their own schooling, right? When we're looking at it from a different parts in Ontario, Black students, in terms of learning, they would have to sit on a bench, or they'd have to go to school at night, or they were in segregated schools. However, the resources they got weren't the greatest, right?
Hmm.
And that being said, and knowing how, again, anti-Black racism is manifested even today
Hmm.
in education, it's so important to also bring that joy aspect, because when the joy is there, that means the kids want to stay there. You know what I mean? School is so integral to a society. Education is so integral to a society in terms of how we progress, right? But a lot of our Black students are coming to school, and like I said, they're not seeing themselves represented in the curriculum. They're not seeing themselves represented in the staff, the way that folks are teaching their students, they're not engaged in it. So they need to lean into something. That's why it's so imperative that we are investing in the different ways Black joy shows up into our schools. So that being said, right, let's say some people will be like, well, there's not many Black teachers in the school. What can we do? That's why it's important to engage, and more so, we should say re-engage Black parents and Black community support into our school system so that our Black students feel seen, feel heard, and feel affirmed, right? And the reason why I want to say re-engage Black parents instead of engage is, again, there's a negative connotations that Black parents don't care. We know the stereotypes that are associated with Black parents, right? Single mother, irate father, too busy, so on, not educated, right? But we have to think about what are the different instances and obstacles that Black parents have had to go through in an education system. If we know that children are able to identify their race in the early learning stages, then imagine the trauma, the barriers, the obstacles, the fight that Black parents have had to do to support their students in elementary school. And there are so many reports about different ways that Black parents and organizations have continued to advocate for Black children, right? So that's why when I talked about it historically, that's why I wanted to let you know. People think that, maybe some folks think, oh, Black parents, they don't care. Kids are just dropping out, whatever. No, that's not, Black students are getting pushed out of school.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So again, Black joy. If students aren't able to get it from what is available in the school, it's important that schools are reaching out to community, because community is there. Wherever Black people are, we know that there's community there. So we need to tap into parents. That's culturally responsive learning, right? We want to support the whole child. Very Afrocentric, right? In terms of the way about it takes a village to raise a child, right?
Absolutely.
So lean on to the parents. They know their kids. Be like, how can we support our students? Lean on to organizations that support Black folk and Black families, and bring them in. Don't be nervous. Some people have like policies, make it so hard, right? So many forms, so many policies, so much stuff you have to do in order to get people to bring them into the community. Are we not, or bring them into a school? Are we all not a part of a community?
Yeah.
Bring them in, learn from them. We're here to serve our students. So again, community space, parents, plus the education system, they need to work together in order to support Black students.
That's so beautifully said. And so the next question I'm going to ask you is, with that in mind, let's say you had a magic kit and you could change, there was one thing you can instantaneously change that
Mm-hmm.
allowed Black students to feel the most supported.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be the representation and making sure there were more Black educators? Would it be how the system even approaches education in the first place in a way that
Mm-hmm.
is culturally responsive and shows
Mm-hmm.
Blackness not as this dark, shadowy thing that we try to
Mm-hmm.
avoid? What would it be? What would be the one thing you changed?
You know why I like this question? Because it makes me want to dream. It's so important to dream,
It is.
because we're thinking about, it's like a liberatory pedagogy in practice,
Yeah.
right? So for me, I think I wish they could see the humanity in our children, like love the children like your own.
That's
See the
big.
humanity in our children, love the children. And love's a big, I know it's heavy, it's cliche,
That's
but it's
big.
like, if you love someone, you're able to decenter yourself from a situation where maybe you did say something racist. You probably did. But because you love them, you're able to be humble and be like, hey, I messed up. Help me learn better.
Oh, I didn't think that was going to
Help me,
make you
help me to do
cry.
better. Right? Because you love someone, you're able to say, you know what? Maybe it takes a couple hours extra to find, a Black Canadian historian, but I'm gonna do it because I know this doesn't only serve my Black students; it serves all students. Right? Because you love someone, you're willing to go the extra mile to engage that newcomer family that's coming in to parent teacher interview. They don't really speak English clear, so you find an interpreter, right? Because you love someone, you are able to strategize strategically. Okay, what are some barriers that are impacting Black families and Black students? Let's invest money. It's not just talk, money. Let's figure out how we could pull money and create programming to support Black students and their families. So again, seeing the humanity, the love, and an investment in our Black children and their families so they can thrive. Because this is like, when we're talking about the gaps or the injustices that Black folks are, and I know I'm talking a lot about Black folks, again, it's because of my positionality, right,
Hmm.
and my relation to the topic, but the injustice has been happening for years, right? And the hope has to be there, because if we don't have hope, then what are we doing? And I know you have a child yourself, right? And even as a mother, that's like another level in terms of like what you want your son to be
Yeah.
able to be like, I can do this. I know I can do this. And I don't have any barriers. Whereas some of our students, they're in schools and they're like, man, because I look like this, there's no way I could do that. Because people that look like me get treated like this. You know? I think it all goes down to love.
You said that I'm like sitting here being really grateful I wasn't wearing like mascara or eyeliner, because when you said love the kids and you explained the way the love could show up in actionable, practical things that you can find what is within your capacity to actually engage in and put it
Exactly.
into your space. That one hit. Yeah, oh, that was a big one. If
Yeah.
there's nothing else, that's the nugget that I hope people take from like, and rehumanizing, because I sit there and think when we look at Black children, racialized children, there seems to be like an age where they stop being these cute people and
Mm-hmm.
they get
Mm-hmm.
adultified,
Yes,
and
the
the extra,
adultification
and it's just like,
of Black girls, of Black boys.
and they
And
lose the
that's
ability to
lost.
grow because you
And
treat
just
them,
be.
yeah, and so love them as children.
Instead of a kid like running running on the street, why is he running?
Yeah,
He's playing. And it just switches like this.
exactly.
Now, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that was big. Like, I don't think you even know how. Like, people are gonna watch this, and that's the, like, if nothing else sticks, that's the one that's gonna hit.
I hope so. And I like how you added too. These are actionable things that we all can do. We all can do it. You know what I mean? Like some of my students, there there's a lot of like inaction that's happening. We
Hmm.
know as adults when folks aren't being treated right.
Yeah,
And because of our ego, we're hesitant to stop it. But we tell kids that, oh, if you see someone getting bullied, make sure you say something,
yeah.
right? We know when things aren't going well. But for some reason, we don't act. And because it's our lack of action that we're seeing a lot of things happening right now,
Yeah.
politically, socially, like you know what's going on.
I see the fire, Doreen. I'm clearly
You know what?
watching.
Some of us did do what we had to do,
Yeah.
but some people didn't do what they're supposed to do. You know what I mean? They're
Some
not,
people were lagging in that group assignment. Some people just put their name on the paper.
and now
We're
it is
all
what it
dealing
is
with the
now.
consequences.
Exactly. Yeah, humanity, love. Honestly, it's just like these things. And then yeah, our Black students will be able to thrive. And again, when black students thrive, everyone does.
It's true.
Black and indigenous students thrive,
Like, literally,
everybody does.
everyone else is going to be fine. It's going to
You're all
work
gonna be
itself
okay.
out.
You're all gonna be okay, you know?
So, this work you do isn't easy. Like, if let's be very honest and real about this. This is not
Mm-hmm.
easy work. It's not like to walk in the park on a beautiful spring day,
Mm-hmm.
as much as we would wish it
Mm-hmm.
was. So, knowing that this work is hard and can sometimes feel defeatist,
Mm-hmm.
what keeps you going? What is the thing that when you wake up in the morning, you're like, it might not be easy, but I'm going to do it for this reason? What is your reason that keeps you going?
What keeps me going? What keeps me going? Honestly, my students, knowing that I can make a difference, my nieces as well. Also seeing the work that other Black women are like yourself are doing, and the courage. I'm gonna shout you out, the courage that it takes to center these topics like anti-racism, diversity, the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's really cool to see what people that look like us are doing and how they're serving their community. And I just want to make sure that the legacy I'm leaving here while I'm on this earth, people know that I was like really passionate about, again, like centering Black narratives and just uncovering more stories, right? To debunk these myths, right? So, yeah, when I think about like what gets me going, it's honestly, it's also the Black women that have supported me and gotten me to where I am today. I have like a great circle that has supported me, Black women, non-Black women as well, that have been able to clear the path, right? Because I definitely need to also acknowledge the equity work that I do. There's been many a women that have done it before me and have laid the ground and have made it, that much easier for me. So I'm just trying to do my part, and I just want a future where Black kids are able to be their authentic self and not hear like, oh, you're whitewashed, or no, you can just be a basketball player, or no, you can just be a rapper, or you know what I mean? You could be an architect, you can be a visual artist, you can go into archaeology, you can be an engineer, you can be the prime minister of Canada.
We're working on it.
Right? Like you can literally do anything. And I just want, like, I always want my kids, like my students, to have a better understanding of themselves and their Blackness when I'm done teaching them. And again, the students who are non-Black, I want them to have a better understanding of what Blackness means and the importance of recognizing it. Yeah.
You said an interesting word when you were talking, and you said the word legacy. And I really like that because a lot of the time when people talk about legacy, we talk about it from like when we're dead and gone. What will the
Mm.
world remember us from when we're dead and gone? And my perspective on legacy has changed a lot in the last few years. And I
Mm-hmm,
think our legacy is actually made while we're alive. It's not what we're
mm-hmm,
told what people talk about when we're gone. I think our legacy happens in the 5 minutes after we have left you for our last interaction.
mm,
And I think when I think about your legacy, I think about all the students who have not even been taught by you, who've walked into that classroom that you've created,
mm,
that space that shows, regardless of what are called their marginalizing identities, they are
mm-hmm,
valid, if nowhere else but in this room. Their existence is valid, valuable,
mm-hmm,
and worth it. And I
mm-hmm,
think that's a legacy you get to create and that you're leaving because you invite students to explore new ways of being, new ways of seeing,
mm-hmm,
and new ways of engaging with people who were cast aside and in
mm-hmm,
histories that were not accounted for.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm excited for when you get to sit back and relax and people get to say, Doreen, this is the mark you've left on the world. Because even as someone who knew you in high school,
Mm-hmm.
that before you came into teaching, before you came into all this, you had a light that you carried in the spaces that you moved in. You came in with kindness, you came in with authenticity, but there was like a joy that radiated in your being. As someone who got to be like on the outside seeing who you were in spaces, you knew when Doreen was in a room. Like you didn't
Actually,
not know.
thank
You knew when
thank you. I'm
Doreen was in a
humbled.
room. And it was like you came with this breath of fresh air and this genuine kindness into spaces. And to see that translate into the way you teach and the passion you carry about subjects and people that have been left to the wayside, it just leaves me excited for when you get to sit back and people are like, hey, Doreen, do you know that this started because I walked into your classroom? I get to
Wow.
be in this place because you gave me space. And I'm so
Wow.
excited for you to get to revel in that.
You know what? That would be a blessing. And it's a blessing. And honestly, every day I learn from my students. As much as I teach them, they also teach me. I feel like I learn a lot about them in regards to, not sweat the small stuff, learn that everybody's different, right? We all have our own, we all have our own like challenges coming into a classroom. We all have the things that we love. We have things that we detest. We have different ways of learning. So it's very humbling to be a teacher because you need to be able to serve everybody, and also while also like meeting curriculum expectations. Like everyone has their own things going on, but when they come into the classroom, you want to make sure that everyone uh, feels welcome. So I learn a lot from them too. But I appreciate your words of kindness, and I don't know. I'm kind of lost for words, but I appreciate it. That's all I could say for now.
No worries. So we're almost at the end of me asking you all the questions I want to ask you, but there are two surprise questions that weren't in the things that I sent you. So I'm throwing you
Okay,
a
okay,
curveball.
okay,
So
cool.
one of the things that I do when I'm hosting Out of the Fog is I ask people to send a message back and then send a message into the future. So I'm
Okay.
going to ask you to send a message back to young Doreen,
Oh,
the little girl who, born in North York, grew up there and showed up in this space. Because there's this trend going on social media right now. Is like, I got to have coffee with younger me. So you
yes.
get to have coffee with a younger version of you. You get to pick the version.
Huh.
What do you want her to know about this path she's about to walk?
I was told when I was a child that because I was a black child, I have to work twice as hard in order to get like the same respect as my, my non-black counterparts. And I guess what I would tell them is, you're good enough as you are. You are good enough just as you are when you show up in this space. And it is okay to take a break. You are good enough, right? Because that's a sentiment I was told, and I was telling you earlier, I was like,
You were hustling.
I mean, we all were, right?
Legit.
Especially if you have African parents,
You
that's
were,
just another
there were
story.
no, failure was
Right,
not
no,
an option.
it wasn't. But someone told me that, that can actually be seen in another way by telling our black children that they have to work twice as hard is also saying that they aren't good enough as themselves, right? And how they enter spaces. So I would say you're good enough and it's okay to rest. And I'd also say you're going to find your people as well. And I found them. So that's what
Okay.
I'd say.
And now you get to send a message forward, but it's not to you.
Yeah.
Okay. This message is to any young person who also happens to find this podcast tomorrow, a year down the line, 20, 30 years down the line. Because once you're in the internet, it lives forever.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. What is that?
So they
To a
find this
young person,
podcast. What do you want them to know as they move through the world?
I think you said it beautifully before we spoke. Take time to know who you are. Try your best to not let other people define you. Really take the time to figure out who you are in spaces. Don't let people tell you who you are, right? Because in different phases in our lives, we identify with certain things. For me, for the longest time, I was a student athlete, right? Playing in high school and then university. And then at some point, life will take its what do you call it? Will take its reign, or
Mm-hmm.
and then it's gonna become something else, right? You just want to make sure you know to the core who you are and do not let anyone dictate that for you. And then I also think it's really important to know your why. We all have a purpose. As a Christian, I believe like we all have a purpose on this earth. In order to know your purpose, you need to do some self-reflection. And I think that's what I'd say. Know who you are, be your authentic self, and then go after it. Because that's what I'm doing. That's what everyone should do. That's what you're doing.
Leave me out of the story. This is about you
That's
sending
what
your
you're
message
doing.
into the
I
future.
everyone needs to get on her level. I'm telling you right now. You need to get on Laurabel's level. This lady out of the frame.
Thank you, my friend. So you have just sat through basically an hour of a really courageous conversation. You have explored ideas and theories, and you've invited people into your world. You've motivated people to find themselves and to create community for students and folks that might be feeling excluded in the spaces that they exist now. So I want to
Mm.
thank you for being open, for being vulnerable, for sharing space and time and working with schedules and all of that and time differences to be here with me and to engage with our audience. If there's any one last parting words you want to tell our folks, what would it be?
I'm humbled. It's a blessing. It's a blessing. It's great. This was awesome. This was awesome. This is great. I'll come back anytime. Next time I'm
Yay!
going to interview you. I'll come
There's
interview
going to
you.
be I promised myself that after the first season, I'm going to check back with all my guests and do a recap and see where they are since we chatted. So prep yourself
Okay.
next year, same time. I'm coming back.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
But thank you
No,
so much, Doreen.
everyone, just stay safe. Be out there and be great.
Ugh.
Be out there and be great.
All right, folks, we'll catch you next time on Courageous Conversations. We did